Welcome to Buckets, brought to you by BetMGM, the king of sportsbooks. My name is Matt Moore. I'm the senior NBA writer for the Action Network, joined by Sean Little. You can find him on Twitter and in the Action Network app at Chicago Flow. Excited. This is our first Friday Best Bets episode and a little bit of a futures talk. We're going to talk a little bit about the league this week. We'll get into kind of our first impressions from the first 3 nights of games, talk about those in the subsequent episodes. You will be able to find us talking absolute future. So while I'll have probably plays next week on whatever you've seen early on, or moves against what we've already bet. Got some concerns about some of the teams I got futures on already. Memphis, all those and more. We'll talk about that starting next week. Today, we're going to do best bets, and then we're going to break down kind of just like what we've seen from the first couple nights of action. We'll do that on today's show. I want to let you know that everything we talk about today can be found in the award-winning Action Network app. It's the best way for you to track your picks. You get up to the second information where the bets and money are coming in on. You get to follow all of our stuff in there. You get to track all of our futures and your futures, all that kind of stuff. Our live shows stream on there, so you can catch those. You catch links to the YouTube page. Our YouTube page, by the way, is youtube.com/The Action Network. Please go give it a subscribe and a like. Turn on notifications so you can check out stuff like our Power Hours for NFL. We've got Green Dot Daily setting you up with what you need to know to bet daily across sports. They cover everything: college football, NFL, hockey, NBA, college basketball starting soon, all that and more in Green Dot Daily. Make sure to check all that out. Sean, man, I'm so glad to have basketball back. I had a really good night on Tuesday. Lost the Warriors. Moneyline bet was fine with that. And then Wednesday, I didn't like any of the plays. I didn't feel good about any of the spots. I was going to just you know what? I'm just going to maybe take it easy tonight. And then an hour before, I was like, no, I got to have action on this. It's the first night of games. I got to have action. That was a fucking disastrous idea because I made a bunch of plays where later I was like, what are you doing? I did things I bet against the Raptors at home in a high motivation spot in their opener. Why? Why would I do that? I looked back and I was like, my model, who I'm not necessarily married to right now because it's built off of power ratings and I want to see how the season kind of goes. But my model was like, oh yeah, no, Charlotte's got a little bit of value. I bet the Hawks, and I was like, later, I was like, what are you doing? What are you doing? So I have settled down. I have 3 plays on the Friday slate, very tight 3 plays. We'll talk about some of the other ones. Let's go ahead and get your best bet, and then I'll list my best bets. We'll talk about those, and then we'll kind of go around the league. What's your best bet on the Friday slate?
Knicks Hawks over 229.5. I would bet it up to 230. I like this spot for both squads. I think there's still a little narrative around the Knicks that they like to play D. We'll jump into it and go through that. But yes, Knicks Hawks over 229.5.
Like it. All right. I've got 3 plays. I've got a half unit play on the Houston Rockets plus 100 on the money line versus the San Antonio Spurs. They opened as a favorite and have moved to a dog. I don't agree with that line move. I think this is an overreaction to how San Antonio looked versus a very flawed Dallas squad that probably should have lost that game, but Kyrie and Luka made just enough plays at the end. I've got Brooklyn Dallas over 228.5, opening line 224.5, and I'll take the Orlando Magic minus 2.5 versus the Portland Trailblazers in a late game. We'll talk about all those and more. Let's talk about that Knicks-Hawks game. So Hawks go to Charlotte. They get absolutely beasted inside. There's a couple of reasons that the Hawks lost that game. Number one, Mark Williams was one of the best players on the floor. PJ Washington was another one of the best players on the floor. Trae Young and DeJounte Murray were not 2 of the best 5 players on the floor. Trae and DeJounte both shot absolute garbage in that game. I am a little worried about Trae Young's shooting. He had a down year last year at 42% from the field, 34% from 3. That's a little down from his career averages and what the trajectory he'd been on. And then he starts off with this kind of performance, and I was like, ooh, that's a little worrisome. Jalen Johnson looks great. I loved how the Hawks played. I like Jalen Johnson and AJ Griffin. Both those guys look really good. Onyeka Okongwu. I don't understand why they haven't traded Clint Capella yet. Knicks got into a real grind, tough game there with the Boston Celtics, but you're liking the over despite Trae's struggles and how the Knicks looked in that Celtics game. What's your cap on taking the over?
Yeah, you mentioned it. Trae Young, DeJounte Murray, 7 of 23 from the floor, 30%. Overall, they let PJ Washington scored 25, got beat up inside. He scored 25 and only knocked down 1 3. So overall, the reason I like the over here, I think these are two offensive first basketball teams. This isn't the 2020 Knicks back when they were top 5 in defensive rating and Taj Gibson and Nerlens Noel were getting 20 plus minutes a night and they were top 5 in defensive rating. And that was that just classic Tom Thibodeau squad. This is not that anymore. If you go back to last year, and I hate going back to last year as much, but a lot of these rosters on both of these squads, the Knicks and the Hawks, are very similar. Last 15 games of last season, both the Hawks and Knicks were top 5 in offensive rating. The Knicks were number 3 coming down the stretch. You remember how well they were playing on the offensive end, led by Jalen Brunson. And then if you go back and look the last 15 games, both were bottom 8 in defense. The Knicks' entire roster is essentially the same. I was in the Garden last night for opening night. It was absolutely rocking. I loved your tweet, Matt, when you said, I can't remember exactly what game it was. I think it was Lakers Nuggets. You said it's not a regular season game, but it's not the playoffs, but it's something. And that's exactly what it felt like in the Garden. It was obviously a home opener, which is always going to be fun, but it felt a little extra. There was the Porzingis factor also, him being back in the Garden and absolutely cooking, got the crowd riled up as well. He had a dust up with iHeart. So there was a lot of stuff going on, but yeah, it felt a little special in there to open the year in the Garden, national TV. You know the whole deal. But these are two offensive first teams that just had bad offensive games to open the year. And you saw flashes, especially with like Quentin Grimes and a few guys. Emmanuel quickly looked phenomenal after a rough postseason for the Knicks. So offensively, those guys were rolling. But then you look over at Brunson, Randall, and Barrett. 19 of 63 from the floor. Another trio of guys like Trae Young and DeJounte Murray, that duo, both shot 30% from the floor. Jalen Brunson was missing a lot of shots that he just flat out doesn't miss. There's a lot of guys like on that Knicks team that get hot and cold. We know RJ Barrett can get hot and cold. We know Julius Randle decides if he wants to get hot and cold in a lot of spots as well. But Jalen Brunson was missing a lot of bunnies, and they missed a lot of free throws. So I think both of these teams are going to play. Hopefully I can get some shooting variance there, and they can shoot it a lot better. I like over 229.5 in this spot. And if they let PJ Washington score 25 in the paint, Julius Randle should be able to get whatever he wants. So I like this spot for the Knicks and the Hawks going over 229.5.
Yeah, I do kind of return back to like it's got to just be like an outlier situation with the Hawks backcourt. Like they just shouldn't play. Like they just shouldn't shoot that poorly, and that happens sometimes on opening nights, especially on the road. That can happen. Charlotte's defense I thought was okay. I think that's maybe the most concerning thing is like I didn't think Charlotte's defense was great, and yet they kind of still those two kind of struggle. But look, like the Hawks still. I thought played with a lot of offensive focus, and I think they'll do that in this game. Like it should be a really fun game to watch, and fun games I think tend to go over. And this number is still below 230, right? Like we've got a sub 230 number for what should be a pretty, like you mentioned, an offensively tilted game, and that to me is like, I think a really good indicator for how this bet could wind up going. I mean, look, Atlanta finished, which is a 105.8 offensive rating. It's also like, look, they got to 106, which is not good in modern context. It's very poor. But they got that with DeJounte and Trae both shooting terrible. So both of those guys have any better, it should be pretty good. And I will say, like, I wasn't impressed with their defense at all. Like they let the Charlotte Hornets rack up a 111, which is not elite, but that's a team that is offensively limited, and LaMelo didn't necessarily shoot well, and yet they still managed to get there to a 112. So I see it. I can kind of get with it. It'll be interesting to see how this one kind of plays out.
Really quick too, Matt, on Trae Young. He plays and takes shots, and offensively was down last year, and then to open the season this year, like you mentioned, he just plays like there's no consequences coming if he runs the offense, if he takes whatever shot he wants, because there technically isn't. He could go out there every night, just like he did last year, and essentially shoot 40%, 37%, and nothing's going to happen. What's going to happen? Right. It's so freeing, especially for a guy that plays his type of game. he's not focused on essentially getting people involved. He wants to get his and do his thing. And if he has a night where he doesn't really feel like working extra hard and things aren't coming easy, he's going to put up big duds and there's no consequences coming for him. So I don't think it really bothers him too much. It's like, hey, I'm Trae Young. I'm the man here. I'm getting coaches fired. I'll get anybody moved I want. And that's it. And that's all. So go ahead and live with this 5 of 17 some days of the week. That's just what it's going to be. So that's a really interesting piece, playing with Trae Young and being part of that organization.
Yeah, the sense around the league has kind of been that no one really like. There's a kind of an internal conflict, I think, over Trae, because like Quinn Snyder wasn't Trae's guy, and he had other guys that he wanted. One of whom coaches in Houston right now, and the fact that Trae didn't get what he wanted in with the new coach hire midseason, a lot of people raised their eyebrows at that. They were very interested to see how that would work out. Now, there's been front office moves that I think were kind of correlated with more tension with Trae, and he won those. So he definitely still has pull. I think that there is an internal tug of war going on a little bit between sides that believe that, hey, we got to keep Trae happy. Trae's our guy. This is our dude. And guys that might be like, well, I think we need to be a basketball organization first. And we'll see how it all shakes out. Speaking of Houston, I've got Houston plus 100 versus the Spurs. So based off of, I didn't move Houston down after they got worked by Orlando. I thought Orlando just played really well. I thought Orlando was just awesome. I think Orlando might be really good. Houston showed real signs of competency and structure. They still have a bunch of young guys, and they're still going to have nights when they're really bad. But to me, this is a great opportunity to sell, I think, relatively high on a San Antonio Spurs team that everybody's like, hey, like they led the Mavericks and were like in this game. Like I was on Spurs money line on a half unit and didn't feel bad about the outcome. Like I wanted them to have a chance to win it late. And then we'll see if Kyrie and Luka could hit shots, and Kyrie and Luka could hit shots because they're Kyrie and Luka. And I'm fine with that because the payout was great on it. I did not see there were still stretches of that game when I was like, oh boy, the Spurs are still very bereft of talent. Like Houston to me is the more talented team here. I don't have like a huge edge on this, which is why it's only a half unit play for me. But like, look, if we do a normal home court evaluation, my power rating on this is that the Spurs should actually be dogs here. I've got the Rockets minus 2.75 on normalized home court, which is like the average of what all teams are over the last 3 seasons. Based off of last year's figures, if we look at like how the Spurs specifically performed at home, I have the Spurs about a little less than -1. So I got about a half point of value on this in terms of where that works out. Like on the money line in particular, I thought was interesting with where this market has kind of shaken out, given that you know I show a pretty big discrepancy on the Spurs with where I've got them. The hold on this game, I don't love in terms of where the market is at in general, but it's enough to get me in there on Houston for a half unit. I think I like Houston to kind of bounce back here and get a first win. Like Wemby will do things, but we saw Wemby pick up all those fouls. That's probably going to be a recurring theme for him early on as teams challenge him. I don't know that Şengün and company can do that, but I do know that the Rockets have a lot more firepower and a lot more NBA veterans than the Spurs do. So I'll take Houston plus 100 on the money line.
Yeah, it's funny that you could say that you can sell high on the Spurs already, but it does feel like that. I think overall it was a successful debut for Wemby and those guys down there. The fact that Dallas was able to cover that number was infuriating if you printed a Spurs ticket, and you should feel very, very lucky if you had a Mavericks ticket in your pocket. So yeah, I do agree with you. I think overall it's tough to say how Wendy's going to deal with the fouling piece because a few of those were really ticky tack.
They were. That's true.
And they could have been a lot. They could have easily either not been called or he easily could have avoided those. It wasn't like he was getting back down or getting put in the post and he just was getting overwhelmed and had no other option but to foul or was lost and was fouling. I think a couple of those could have went either way, and he just can make a little bit of I guess a more passive move, let guys go by and they're not called, and then maybe he gets the extra 4 or 5 minutes in the fourth, a couple more buckets and they're able to hang on and actually have a chance to win that game. But the overall consensus, from what I can tell, is that I was listening to a couple different people, and I was reading a couple different things that people are already like throwing out. Well, if Wemby is going to be able to already at 19 close out the fourth with confidence, even after coming off the bench cold after sitting because of fouls, maybe this could be a play-in team. It's like, nah, like let's relax
Yeah.
a little bit here.
Chill
So
out.
I do agree that if you're a casual guy too and you wanna get in the spot to watch Wemby and enjoy it, all that money's gonna go on the Spurs at home in this spot. So yeah, we could sell high on the Spurs even this early. And I trust Ime Udoka, regardless of what has gone on and how they've started the season. And let's be clear here on the start of the NBA season. We have 82 of these,
Yeah.
almost 1,300 games.
Right.
Take it slow, relax, ease into it, because as many numbers as you want to break down from last year and the preseason, you just flat out don't know. So
Yep.
let's see how it shakes. I do think that the Spurs may be getting a little too much gas just purely off the fact that Wembanyama is going to have positive talk around him. They did compete with the Dallas Mavericks team, in my opinion, that is vastly over-regarded. So even in that sense, I think they competed with a Mavericks team that's not that good, and they're getting a lot of smoke. So let's sell high. I agree with you here, and maybe Dylan Brooks can go back to back weeks or back to back games with knocking down 4 threes, and this this should be easy cash.
Yeah. If Dylan Brooks has another good shooting night, I'm gonna start just spamming Brandon Anderson in the text feed with good Dylan Brooks stats. Brooklyn Dallas over 228.5. This open 224.5. I don't think you're chasing enough steam here. I don't think it's too much. I understand if there's like a little bit of hesitation on that, but for me, my projections on these numbers are always going to be a little bit flawed because they're going to be so heavily skewed to last year. Um, I wind up in this spot though being affected by one thing in particular, which is Cam Thomas, who was absolutely sensational in the Nets' first game, in which they almost stole one from the Cleveland Cavaliers. I was incredibly close. It took Max Strus hitting a bunch of threes and a Donovan Mitchell game winner for them to be able to get into that spot. So it was a really, I think, promising opener um, for the Nets. To be quite honest, like I like that how they played in that game. I like that the way they competed with the Cavaliers, who I had them -2.5, so it was heartbreaker they didn't get a rebound and get fouled because I could have maybe snuck out one of the cover on that one. But I will say, if we kind of look at the impact of Cam Thomas, he's just going to wind up, I think, having a guy that's just a pure scorer who's bad defensively. That shifts a little bit of the identity of the Nets, and the Nets in general. They've got Cam Johnson on a little bit of a minutes restriction, and to me, that factors in pretty significantly into kind of how to cap these games. And so when we look at the overall makeup of these games and kind of where they're at, like I said, the movement on this has been pretty high. I'll also say that when we look at not just the Nets, but we look at Dallas, there's kind of this conversation of like, oh, but Dallas actually played some defense. Again, it's kind of correlated here, right? Where it's like I'm fading what we saw from San Antonio, where it's like, oh, you held the Spurs down. Congratulations on holding the San Antonio Spurs, one of the truly worst offenses that we've had in the league the last year, and haven't significantly improved. Congrats on holding them to only a 111.2 offensive rating, right? And on the other side, I do think Dallas is going to score. Their offense is elite. Like they'll probably be better than they were in game one where they had 117. So with Brooklyn and Dallas, I think that this is a good spot to kind of play the offense. I think this is mostly a play on the Nets offense with Cam Thomas will score more than expected. I think this is a better than what people realize spot to get in on them. I do have this projected over. I've got it in the 230, so I think it's fine at any number above there. But this is kind of correlated between the San Antonio Spurs and Maverick spot here, right? I'm basically taking that late game and I'm playing against what perceptions have been on them. So I'll take the over 228.5.
Yeah, Cam Thomas was absolutely sensational, and they needed every single bucket from him in that spot. Like you said, there's going to be nights where there's so many guys. They had 10 guys play 12 plus minutes. which is up there with a squad that I really enjoyed watching this week, was the Thunder, another team that played 10 guys, 10 plus minutes. But there's going to be a lot of nights too, especially with how many wings they continue to have in Brooklyn, that they're going to need a guy to just flat out go out and score, and that's exactly what Cam Thomas wants to do. I would love to see that from Cam Johnson, for him to get there and just absolutely be more about scoring, because I think could use that from him. But yeah, it's they still are rotating a ton of guys, and we'll see where it shakes. But I do like the spot.
This number's moved against me, but I do like the Magic minus 2.5. This opened 3.5, and it bounced down to minus 2.5 by the time that we're recording this. I am going to take the Orlando Magic versus the Blazers. It's not really a play against Portland. Like, Portland was on the road in LA for the Clippers. I thought that, like, Scoot Henderson was real shaky. DeAndre Ayton got in foul trouble. Like, a lot of things went wrong for Portland. It's honestly not that. To me, it's that I think Houston Orlando is a game where not a lot of people probably paid attention to it. I loved every single thing I saw of Orlando. It's one game, they're at home, but I did upgrade them a half a point in power rating just based off of what I saw, because it wasn't just that Cole Anthony hit shots. It wasn't just that Franz Wagner is just a baller and is he is playing more point forward and really playing well in terms of directing traffic and doing all the things that I really want to see him doing, and playing a bigger role in the offense, because he's so polished and so good. And if you've been watching him in FIBA, that's very evident. It's also, here's a one for you. It's Markelle Fultz, man. So Kel in that game goes, it's 10 points, right? He's got 10 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, shoots 5 of 9. I am telling you that Markelle Fultz looked fantastic in that game. Like, he looked so sharp. Cole Anthony had 20 off the bench off of his new extension, which I did not think they should have made. 20 and 8 for Cole Anthony, 8 to 12 from the field, and they obliterated him. But, like, Fultz was really, really good. Banchero only shot 6 times in this game. It didn't really need to. That's honestly promising for me, because he didn't have to try and do too much. Wagner only shot 5 of 12, but he was able to get to the line. They generated a lot of free throws. They're physical. They're tough. I think that goes against what Portland's able to do. I like their defense. It swarms. I think this is, like, they've got Wendell Carter Jr. to battle DeAndre Ayton. I like the bench matchup versus a team that's obviously playing a bunch of young guys to try and, like, rebuild a little bit. The wings, like, they have the wings to match up with Portland. I just think that Orlando is genuinely a much better team, more so than a 2.5 gap here, even with home court, home opener, etc. So I'll lay the 2.5 with the Magic and ride this train for a little bit.
Yeah, I think the theme too here is, if you look at Orlando's roster, they have tons of guys that have been there for 3+ years now. We're talking 2.5 plus full seasons of these guys playing together and having an opportunity to mesh and do all those things. Fultz, Suggs, Anthony, Wendell Carter Jr. now. Franz has now been there for a while. Banchero's on his this is what, year 3 for Banchero, yeah? Or is this year 2? This is year 3, right?
2.
So
it's year 2 for Banchero, year 3 for
year 2 for Banchero. Yeah, so, but that's what I mean. Like, this is still a second full year for a guy with that talent, and they're deep. They play a lot of guys. So if you look across the league on opening night, the teams that relatively are bringing the same guys on the roster hung in there, played tough, and performed really well. The Nets, who we just talked about, is another example of that. Orlando is a perfect example of that. So that's a theme across the board. This might be one of those teams in the East that surprises a lot of people as we start to get rolling here, because they're young, they've played together for a while, and they looked good to start the year so far. So we'll see how that shakes. I'm shocked you didn't like that Cole Anthony deal. I feel like that's a pretty cheap, fair deal I feel like that's good business for the Magic.
I have a hard time with these, because I hear a lot of noise that's not necessarily true. It's just like they talked and there wasn't anything there. But, like, I heard pretty consistently they were looking to move Cole and that they wanted to add a point guard. And one of the things I really struggle with is guys, when they're up for extension, they try and see if they can move them, because that's like a high point, right? Where the new team wants to extend them and lock them up. And so you've got this opportunity to trade him at a very high peak value. But I just have a hard time reconciling, like, well, you didn't want him. Like, you were trying to move him. I heard all this talk from these other teams about you making him available, and then you turn around and you give him a multi-year big money deal. And I was talking about
Yeah.
this. Well, I was talking about this with the personnel guy that does cap stuff. And he's like, yeah. He's like, Matt, he's like, you try and explore the value to see if you can get better. If you can't, what you can't do is you can't get worse. So you retain them on contract so that you have the asset long term. And even if it doesn't make your team better, it makes your asset package better. And that's just like that's good. He's like, it's not that Cole Anthony is not a player that they like. Like they drafted him, they developed him, they've played him, they haven't moved off of him, they like him. They saw an opportunity to see if they could get better. Those opportunities did not come through, and when you're faced with that choice of a binary, most teams will opt for retaining a guy. And I was like, okay, all right, fair enough. Um, let's talk about
Very
a couple other
movable
games.
though. And even
Yeah,
if
it is
if
very
it goes sour, very movable deal. So I wasn't mad at that for that situation for Orlando. They didn't bury a bunch of money. So I'm not mad at that. And I'm partial to Cole. I think he could play. I think he's a good overall competitor in the NBA. So I think it was good business. And if it's not for Cole's side or the Magic side, that's a movable piece.
It's true. Let's talk about a couple of these other games as a means to talk about the league. I'm very close to firing on Denver -4.5 versus Memphis. Memphis's injury report. John Morant's obviously out with suspension. Brandon Clark's obviously out with an Achilles injury. Steven Adams is out for the season with a knee injury. Um, Luke Kennard is out with a concussion protocol, and Santi Aldama is going to miss another game because of his ankle. So Morant, Kennard, Aldama, Clark, Adams. That's a good starting five in the NBA that they just don't have. And
Yeah.
I was so mad as somebody, and like you can rest assured if you're listening to this, if you listen to all our future stuff and you heard how high Brandon and I are in the Grizzlies, and you're wondering our reaction to all this news, like it's disaster. Like Steven Adams going down was basically just like it was a bad day in the texts
Yeah.
when that went down.
It's a
And
big blow.
and it sucks for everybody. Like Steven Adams is one of the most enjoyable guys just to have around the league, and it really sucks that we're going to be without him for another year. So they're hurt. Their bench looked awful yesterday, and that's why they lost. If you go back and you look, the Grizzlies starters won their minutes versus the Pels, and they got blown out because their bench is so horrific. Because the front office is just like, well, I guess we just won't have a backup power forward. Get in there, Jake LaRavia at fucking 6'4". Are you kidding me? Like David Roddy? Like, what are we doing?
Yeah.
So that takes away one of the big edges teams have versus Denver, which is the bench for Denver is going to be bad. And Denver obviously looks really sharp. I'm staying away from it just because I'm like, look, Denver could not be more juiced right now, coming off of beating the Lakers and leading the entire game and looking like the best team in basketball. The Grizzlies just lost their home opener to the Pels by double digits, did not play well. This does not like it's enough for me to be like, I don't need a bet on this game. It's the Nuggets who were terrible last year on the road, will probably not be great on the road this year. Their defense, Aaron Gordon told the other night, he described it as lacking, and that the scoreboard doesn't reflect the work that they need to do on the defensive end. So there's a lot of warning signs for me here, but boy, it's tempting just with the fact of sometimes you can get too high. You can talk yourself into, well, I don't want to bet on this team, or I want to bet against this team because I'm buying or selling high on them, right? It's just that like Denver might just be adequately priced. Like they might just be the best team in basketball, and this might need to be a higher margin considering the Grizzlies injury situation.
Yeah, David Roddy played 28 minutes. that's a ton of minutes for him in a team that we expect to be towards the top of the Western Conference. Listen, I watched the Lakers and Nuggets for 5 fucking minutes, and I knew my money in the first half was torched, and I immediately thought that the Lakers never ever want to see these dudes. Period.
Yeah.
Point blank. Like they need to hope someone else knocks them out of the playoffs or some other way, shape, or form. They don't have to see those guys. So call it a bad matchup, call it what you want. But it's one of those spots for me. This injury report is nasty stuff, but it was going to be the Nuggets or nothing for me, even if that everybody on the injury report was ready to go. Obviously, we knew Morant and Adams weren't going to play, but I'm right now in a spot where I'm not looking to play any tickets, print them out, write them down, call the buddy, anything against the Denver Nuggets at the moment, just because how casually it looked and how it all came together.
Yeah.
There was no type of rust. I made a joke about Michael Porter Jr. What a life this guy lives. He just
Yeah.
grabs uncontested rebounds. He makes 30 plus million and he gets relatively open jump shot looks. And he's a big piece of the team. Don't discount it. But the way that roster is constructed and how it fits so perfectly, he is in a great spot. They looked really good. I loved how aggressive Gordon was going to the basket. They looked like it was midseason form already. Was that personal? Maybe I got it wrong, Matt. Maybe that Denver really does kind of just hate those guys and they want to bury him every time they see him. So that's what they
I,
did.
I'll tell you
But
this, man. I'll tell you this. You mentioned that I talked about the environment. Here's what happened. Okay, so they have the ring night. They get the rings. It's very emotional, etc. Game tips off, and like I thought that the Grizzlies or the Nuggets rather, like really kind of thought, like kind of seemed like okay, yeah, we'll just kind of settle in. And LeBron like takes one of the early ones, goes down and dunks it, and like plays with like a real intensity.
yeah,
And Joker, if you watch Joker's reaction, like he kind of ducks his head a little bit, and it was, oh, okay, all right, we're gonna do so.
we're doing this.
We're doing this, okay, all right, let's
Yeah,
fine, let's go. And
yeah,
I asked AG after the game, I was like, you guys played a pretty clean game. You only had 11 turnovers. You guys look like you just picked it back up. Like you shot well.
yeah.
Usually guys are rusty, especially,
That's
you
exactly
took
what it
the
looked like.
summer off. And AG was like, honestly, it felt like we just stopped playing yesterday. We just picked it right back up, man. It's so easy with these dudes. And MPJ said the same thing. KCP said the same thing. That starting five, I wrote about this on Action Network. You can find it in the app. Like that starting five, it they are that's the you can have Dame and Giannis, and you can have Booker and Beal and KD, and you can have Drew and Tatum and the Brown and Porzingis. The starting five for the Nuggets, that combo of those five is the best in basketball. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's good looking for Denver right now. We'll see how they do in this
And
game.
Matt, to see Jamal Murray talking shit in like the first quarter. I'm like,
Yeah,
wait a minute. Like that's not Jamal Murray. Like he waits till the fourth quarter. This is the first game of the regular season, and Jamal Murray is chirping. Like, yeah,
yeah.
I don't know, man. This is they just picked it right back up. That's the perfect way to say it. So if you're looking to fade Denver early, I think that game is going to be a grind. That's something I would stay away from because it's hard to guess when guys are going to want to show up. And if those guys feel like continuing to bash people in game two, you're going to be in for a grind and try to cash that ticket against the Nuggets.
Cavs open -5 versus OKC, and I didn't bet it because I wanted to think about it. And it already moved to 3.5 as we're recording this on Thursday night. And now it's kind of in a dead spot for me. I liked it at 5. I was leaning towards OKC at 5. At 3.5, it's a pass for me. This is tough because it's a game I really kind of want to bet. Where OKC was one of the hits for me on Wednesday playing the Bulls. I think it's probably easy to kind of do the same thing that we did with the Mavericks with beating Wemby, where it's like, yeah, but you beat this team. The Bulls have, and this with rocking the Bulls hat and the background, like they had that players only meeting after the game one. I said this
Yeah.
on Twitter. For me, it's like, look, I think this team is genuinely well coached. I think this team genuinely has a lot of talent. I think this team hates playing together. Like I never see these guys being
What
like
makes you say
excited
that?
to play together. Like never once do they seem like they've got pop, like they've got like. And honestly, a lot of this, people. I understand that Zach LaVine's going to be the bad guy in all this, but I feel like it sucks that basically DeMar he was ascending to like looking like a real high level performer. DeMar DeRozan shows up and Zach LaVine kind of turns back into like hit or miss. And that's just my view on things. But as far as OKC Cleveland goes, do I think OKC might be getting too much credit for beating the Bulls. Maybe. I also think this team's really good. I think this team's really good on both ends of the floor. We hyped them up. Like, I took the over, but I also like the Cavs a lot. And I think the Cavs are probably a little down after losing, not losing, but barely beating the Nets.
Almost,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, they got a lot they can improve on. Still without Jared Allen, though. So that kind of changes this a little bit. I should probably bet OKC. I'm going to go ahead and hold off, given that it's a home opener spot for Cleveland. I want to wait, but I'm really excited for this game. I almost had to play on OKC, but I'm going to go ahead and stay away from it after the line movement to 3.5.
Yeah, I would be interested to see historically what the cover rate is for teams that start the season with 2 straight road games.
Yeah.
And then the second game is a home opener for the other person. I know that's a bit granular, but I'd be interested to see that. Overall, we're on the same page with Oklahoma City. I watched the Bulls game in its entirety. I went back and watched it this morning. They played within themselves the entire time. That Bulls team, I think that's a good way to put it, that they just don't enjoy playing together. And every time I see DeMar DeRozan and Zach LaVine on the floor together, it's not the best.
It's
The starting
sad.
five for the it's tough. The starting five for the Bulls, so DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Patrick Williams, who I can do a whole. If you ever want to do a 2-hour podcast on a player and you call it a Buckets exclusive, Matt, you let me know. We could do Pat Williams, the $200 million man, according to himself. But I digress. DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, Pat Williams, Cody White, and Vucevic. They played 15 minutes together. The defensive rating was a 138.7. So those guys are getting absolutely torched on defense by the young upstart in the Thunder. Shea is doing whatever he wants across the board. So, yeah, they're awesome. I loved everything that they were doing. And then when you look at the Bulls and you go off of – it is hard to tell how good Oklahoma City is, but I had them rated high coming in. They go in on the road. And overall, over the years, like the Bulls roster construction, like Billy Donovan or not, they have played pretty well in the United Center. That's not the easiest place to play. I know that from just personally speaking. So for those guys to go in there and take care of business the way they did, it was impressive. Now, even when the Bulls focused on the D, so they brought in Carter, Javon Carter, Torrey Craig, Caruso, and Drummond, they played some minutes together, which is not a lot of offense. Oklahoma City still were able to put together quite a bit of possessions that were fluid offensive basketball. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm high on the Thunder. I'm also high on the Cavs. I think they have a lot of motivation. I think Donovan Mitchell, you know the rumblings about him not necessarily wanting to be there, et cetera, but he's a pro's pro. He showed up, did his thing. I expect him to show up on a nightly basis. We talked about the season total benchmark of 50. They ended up closing at 50.5. So a lot of expectations coming out of Cleveland. This is definitely one of the best games on the slate.
Jared Allen is out for this game. Darius Garland's questionable again. I will say that even though I think with the injuries, I probably lean pretty heavy to OKC here. We'll see what this number is. I'm going to give it till we're recording this Thursday night, but don't be surprised if I put in a play on OKC money line on Friday. Finally, in a rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals, how about Boston taking on the Miami Heat? Not as big a game as it could have been if they got.
We're back, Matt. We're back. We're back with the matchup.
We're back. Who doesn't want to watch it? Who doesn't want to watch and bet on Heat Celtics again? The look ahead line on this was 4.5, and it's gone to 8 based off of I think how good Boston is or Boston looked in that opener. Like, KP looked amazing. Tatum drops 35. Like it was a good first performance for a Celtics team that's still kind of learning to play together. They haven't played with Drew much, so they're still kind of figuring that out. Derek White had some absolutely incredible defense in that game. Like it's underrated because everyone's going to talk about Drew, and there's all these like stats about Drew. Derek White's a motherfucker too. Like it's that backcourt is tough. Based off of last year's power rating for home court, I've got this Celtics based off of normalized. So if we just take like the average, I've got this Heat. I'm going to stay away. but I want to kind of get your thoughts on Heat Celtics. I will also kind of say, I think I want to play an under. Like I the under in this game is 217.5, so it's low. But I think it's right that it's low. I think that's where it should be. And I kind of am leaning towards playing an under here in Celtics Heat. Your thoughts?
Get used to seeing these type of numbers if you want to back the Boston Celtics in Boston. You're going to be looking at 8s, 9.5s, 11s. This is what you're going to see every single time they're at home, just because we know how on the offensive side of the ball how explosive they can be. We know how we, along with everybody else, knows just how good they can be if they put it together for stretches. And they did that in the preseason. There was a couple stretches against the Knicks in the preseason, actually. They had all 5 on the floor, and they looked sensational on offense. They just haven't, under Mazzulla, there's been just stretches where they're extremely focused, locked in, look phenomenal, and then snap your fingers, and Jaylen Brown doesn't know what to do. Everybody looks confused. The effort's not there. So it's a tough team to cap. If you go back and remember the numbers that we would see for the Miami Heat, every single night, the number's 9 in the conference finals. It's like nobody knows what to do with this team. And there was nights where I'm printing a ticket on the Celtics -8. And it's like, how am I doing this? And it's like, it's a good spot. And then some cash, some wouldn't, right? But if you want to back the Boston Celtics in Boston, get used to laying these big numbers against really good teams, because they're an impossible team to figure out, because when they're playing really well, they're clearly the best team in the East. But we don't know when that's going to show up. And it could start as soon as game 2 in the home opener in Missoula's second year.
All right, that's going to do it for Buckets for a Friday. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with Sean. We've got shows, obviously, 5 days a week. Sunday night, I'll be recording with Joe Delera and Jim Turvey. We'll be doing a weekend recap as well as best bets for Monday. So make sure to tune in Monday morning for that show. And then best bets all throughout the week. And then we'll hit Sean again on Friday. And I will promise you, I will definitely already be firing on awards props by next Friday. So make sure to tune in for that. My thanks to David Payne, our producer, as well as Hutton Jackson. Make sure to download the Action Network app and check out youtube.com/theactionnetwork. We'll see you guys again next time. Until then, let's get buckets.